I believe you know why you've been called in, her voice echoed through the office, which had fallen silent. Before I could lift my hands from the keyboard, Miranda was already standing in front of me, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Her dark red heels struck the floor with the rhythm of an execution drum roll. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice was loud enough to reverberate across the sixth floor. "You're dead weight," Miranda declared, loud enough that everyone in the workspace who had been casually browsing email froze mid-screen, hands suspended over their mice. "We're cutting costs, and your position no longer fits the new direction." No one moved. I could feel the stolen glances from nearby cubicles, and the way the air seemed to thicken with tension, waiting to see how I would react. Yell? Argue? Beg? I simply set my pen down, laced my fingers together, and looked her straight in the eye. Calm. "Your reports are always late, you question processes that have worked for years, you don't really contribute in meetings," she continued, as if reading from a pre-written indictment, each word sharpened to destroy a man's credibility without relying on truth. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had submitted the quarterly financial analysis 2 days early, but clearly she hadn't bothered to open the file. "HR has your paperwork ready. You have until the end of the day to clear your desk," she added, turning and walking off like she had just closed a victorious deal. Her voice lingered behind her, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people will never understand what it really takes to succeed in this industry." I nodded slightly. "Then go ahead, fire me." She paused. I imagined she had been preparing for tears, pleading, or at least a burst of indignation. She got none of that. Just a quiet acceptance. "My name is Frank. I'm 45. I've been with Medtronic since before we had a designated parking lot. I once led the risk analysis team when big data was still a marketing gimmick. But 3 years ago, after my father passed away, I stepped down from my role as VP of Strategic Development and moved to internal compliance under the guise of reducing stress. No one knew I was the company's largest shareholder. No one knew the CEO who had just fired me was appointed with my full support. Miranda Blake, 39, had been a rising star in pharmaceutical tech, MBA from Stanford, honored on Fortune's 40 Under 40. She was brought in to modernize operations and drive international revenue growth. I didn't object. In fact, I saw potential in her. I didn't raise an eyebrow when she dismantled our internal mentorship program, fired 2 of our most experienced directors, and replaced core middle managers with temp contracts. I watched in silence, documenting everything. Every late-night meeting, every phone call pressuring labs to cut budgets, every quiet revision to our drug approval protocols, because I needed to be certain my next move would not miss. But I hadn't expected Miranda to strike the match this soon, right in the middle of the office, in front of the people I'd shared lunch with for years, in front of staff I had helped raise proposals for, in the very space I had built over decades. She probably thought this was the end of my story. What she didn't know was that I never saw this as a conclusion. I called it a beginning. I packed my things as requested. 1 leather briefcase, a few notebooks, a faded Christmas party photo in a cheap frame. Everyone pretended to stay busy, except Marcus, our head of legal. He didn't look away. He stared at me, then quickly stepped into the hallway with his phone. That gesture said more than words. I left the office at 3:46 p.m. The security gate clicked behind me, sounding like a door slamming shut, one I had opened myself years earlier. As I walked into the parking garage, dusk had settled, but in my mind, everything was clear. 3 years earlier, when my father, Charles Donovan, collapsed from a stroke during the annual shareholders meeting, I knew Medtronic was heading for turbulence. Even with my MBA from Wharton and years on the strategy board, the directors wanted a fresh face with disruptive energy to calm investors. Miranda Blake was nominated. I let it happen. Instead of holding power, I stepped back, but not entirely. Using my mother's surname, I re-entered the company as Frank Ellis, an internal auditor at the Houston branch, an unassuming post. They had no idea I controlled the majority stake through a trust named Donovan Heritage. The exact number? 82%. No one noticed the quiet man who clocked in on time, drank decaf, and snapped pictures of whiteboards during meetings. They didn't know I was recording every discussion involving Miranda. They didn't know I had filed 23 anonymous whistleblower reports every time safety protocols were slashed. Those deemed invisible often see the most. I had no intention of returning to power early, but Miranda had just forced my hand. That night, in my apartment on the 18th floor, still under a mid-tier employee lease, I opened the safe and pulled out a gray envelope I had sealed long ago. Inside, a complete leadership transition plan, a replacement management roster, and the notice for an emergency shareholders meeting already scheduled weeks in advance. For when Miranda inevitably went too far, I dialed Marcus. "Frank?" His voice trembled. I guess you're going to exercise your rights?" "I didn't want to do it publicly," I said, my eyes fixed on Miranda's approved budget for external strategy consultants. "But she fired me in front of everyone." Marcus exhaled. "Then let's meet tomorrow. 9 a.m., conference room, 30th floor." After the call, I checked a private email account only 3 people had access to. One new file had arrived, an audio recording of Miranda speaking with our CFO, casually stating, "Once we gut the internal staff, the licensing deal will go through clean." That file would unravel everything. At 7 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the executive elevator, unused by me for 3 years. Every layer of disguise was gone. I wore the custom suit my father ordered from New York before his death, a charcoal tie, and carried a marked-up folder thick with truth. The boardroom was full. Everyone who once voted to approve Miranda sat at the table. She stood at the head, smiling confidently, pitching Phase 3 restructuring like it had won an innovation award. He entered without a word. Miranda looked up. Her face shifted, then stiffened. "Who are you?" she asked, voice clipped with confusion. Marcus stood. "Controlling shareholder. The man you all forgot." I placed my folder in the center of the table, sliding it toward her. "My name is Frank Donovan," I said clearly, "and I never left this company. I only stepped back to see if we could still honor what we once stood for." Across the table, a pen slipped from someone's hand and tapped against the glass. "I don't understand this," Miranda murmured. "You don't need to," I replied. "You just need to listen to what I'm about to reveal, including the illegal payout you lined up from Eastbridge Labs." Miranda's confident smile finally cracked. When I walked out of the boardroom, Miranda was still frozen in her chair. The file I had placed in front of her held over 300 pages of documents I had gathered over the past 3 years. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. What I had witnessed firsthand was what truly pushed me to act. From the very beginning of returning to Metatronics under the name Frank Ellis, I saw the shift. Not a positive one. The research department now functioned like a contract manufacturing line. Brainstorming sessions, once brimming with energy, had been replaced by lifeless status updates. Everything now served short-term gains. Veteran employees were forced into early retirement, younger staff lacking a full understanding of pharmaceutical ethics were promoted to lead clinical trials. One late autumn afternoon, I found Haley, a technician with 19 years of experience, crying in the supply room after being reassigned to a nameless role in the new management system. She had been the first to detect adverse reactions in the kidney treatment drug we launched in 2014. Now she had nothing but an empty desk and an email titled Internal Restructuring. I began documenting everything quietly. From the labs, I collected images of test files with missing approval codes, mixed in with outgoing batches. From admin, I got meeting schedules between Miranda and the financial advisors, those pushing supply chain optimization by slashing verification stages. Every time an employee was let go for performance issues, I reached out. Not one had a formal warning on record. Several had top marks in the last 2 review cycles. I contacted them after hours, presenting myself as a concerned coworker. They told me how Miranda rewrote protocols without consultation, how voices of dissent were slowly pushed out. Of course, no one suspected me, a quiet internal auditor, politically neutral, always staying late and sipping instant decaf. No one imagined someone like that was collecting evidence to dismantle the system from within. In the 12th month, I discovered something more dangerous. The third-party lab Miranda hired, a newly formed shell company in Delaware, had no license for independent medical operations. The clinical data for a new asthma drug had been falsified. I couldn't believe she was gambling with patient safety just to shave a few $1 million off the quarterly report. I submitted an anonymous warning to the board of directors. No response. The next month, Miranda cut 18% from the R&D budget. The Parkinson's research project was suspended indefinitely, not because it failed, but because it wasn't commercially viable fast enough. I kept the edited internal memo and compared it to the original report the lead scientist had submitted. Everything Miranda did came wrapped in corporate jargon: strategic restructuring, operating model innovation, or human capital optimization. But everyone who worked here knew the truth. It was how they erased the people who had built Medtronic, with sweat, intellect, and, at times, their entire careers. I had planned to wait until the next shareholder conference to release the evidence, but then came that Tuesday afternoon. I was passing the small 11th floor conference room. Miranda was inside with her external consultants. The door wasn't fully shut. I heard every word. Cut 3 departments, shift production to Brazil. I'll announce the merger next quarter. By then, the board won't have a choice. Frank Ellis? He's nobody. She had just torn off her last mask. I didn't sleep that night. For 3 years, I had worked like someone digging a tunnel, pulling loose every brick from the foundation Miranda had built. But once she called me nobody, while planning to sell out everything Medtronic stood for, I knew it was time to act. Not to reclaim my reputation, but to protect the hundreds being used as pawns in a merciless game. When I walked into the boardroom today, I didn't need a nameplate. All it took was eye contact. Those who once thought I'd walked away now saw me where I belonged, standing between this company and the hollow greed trying to consume it. As the elevator doors closed behind me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen showed Marcus B., the head of legal, always calm, even during storms. I picked up before I could speak. His voice came in low and urgent. Frank, I just got the draft of next quarter's personnel plan. Miranda's planning to lay off at least 80 employees across research, compliance, and domestic distribution. I clenched the handle of my case. Any official reason listed? I asked. Low performance, product restructuring, supply chain integration, Marcus answered. But I checked. The majority are staff who've pushed back on the new policies, especially those aligned with traditional research teams. No need for more questions. Miranda was clearing the board, eliminating resistance, lining up her pieces, preparing for the next move. All of it led to one thing: the merger. The deal had only been a hallway rumor, Medtronic merging with Hellisen, a global pharma conglomerate based in Zurich, to form a next-generation biotech alliance. But Hellisen wasn't just bringing tech. They brought industrial steel operations, reduced production cycles, gutted internal research, profit over everything. For Medtronic, it meant erasing everything my father had fought to preserve. I arranged to meet with Diane, VP of HR, at a coffee shop across from headquarters. She had once signed off on rehiring me as a compliance auditor. Quiet, but sharp. By the time I sat down, she had already slid a thick manila envelope across the table. These are internal notes from the emergency HR meeting last Friday, she said, skipping the pleasantries. Along with 2 emails Miranda sent directly to senior admin, instructing contract terminations for our senior research leads. I pulled out a random page. Ethan Cole's name jumped out. Head of Neurodegenerative Therapy Development. Winner of last year's National Research Award. A side note read, obstructs leadership vision, resistant to new methodology. Diane lowered her voice and leaned in closer. There's one more thing. I discovered that Miranda signed a drug trial agreement with Hellisen before getting board approval. The trial failed at phase 2, with signs of liver damage in 6% of participants. She buried the report, and the research lead was fired the next day. I stared at Diane for a few seconds. Do you still have the documents? She nodded. Backed up on a USB, but more importantly, she signed a commitment to share Medtronic's research data after the merger, with a personal bonus clause. If the deal goes through, Miranda will receive a post-merger consulting fee worth $4 million. I braced both hands on the table, eyes locked on hers. Would you be willing to testify if needed? Frank, she exhaled, I've spent 16 years at this company. I won't let someone sell it off. That night, I didn't go home. I went straight to the family law office in River Oaks. On the 6th floor of an old brick building, I sat across from Carl Emerson, my father's legal advisor for over 3 decades. Frank, if what you're saying is true, Carl said, Miranda hasn't just violated company bylaws. She's looking at potential criminal charges for medical data fraud. I handed him all the documents. I need you to prepare an emergency shareholders meeting. We'll need enough signatures. Also get a press release ready. When the time comes, I want the entire market to know exactly what's going on. Carl nodded. This won't be easy. She has allies on the inside. Then I'll pull up every tile. When I left the office, rain was falling across Houston. Cold drops pounded the roof of my car like the ticking of a countdown clock. Miranda thought firing me was her win. She never imagined the man she pushed out held the power to decide whether she even got to walk into that boardroom tomorrow. The morning of the meeting, I sat in the office that once belonged to my father, the 32nd floor space Miranda had rebranded as the Executive Innovation Suite to erase every trace of him. The walls were repainted sterile white, the chairs sleek and black, but I had quietly returned one thing, a small portrait of my father smiling beside the homemade mixer he used in the company's early days. I opened the gray briefcase I'd carried for over 10 years. Inside was everything I needed. Unlawful employment terminations, internal emails proving Miranda had ordered trial results altered, a detailed merger plan never approved by the board, and most importantly, financial reports with redacted cash flows from Hellickson. Carl called at exactly 8:15. Meeting notices have been sent to all major shareholders and the executive board. The session begins at 9 o'clock in room Delta 14. I've confirmed attendance from 9 board members, 3 strategic investor reps, and 2 independent legal counsels. Has Miranda acknowledged receipt, I asked. She has. No response yet, likely planning a late entrance to gauge reactions. I nodded, knowing Carl couldn't see me. The elevator took me to the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of Houston waking up. Traffic inching forward under soft morning light, calculated and cold, like the moves Miranda had been making for 3 years. As I stepped in, the tension was tangible. A few faces looked away. Others stared at the files in front of them. Marcus sat beside me, a red-labeled USB in front of him. Diane's evidence. Carl followed shortly, trailed by 2 gray-suited men, stern and silent, independent legal advisors from Williams and Key. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stood up and addressed the room. Thank you all for being here. This isn't a routine meeting. Today's session is an emergency hearing to evaluate Medtranic's ethical compliance, financial transparency, and leadership direction in light of alarming internal misconduct. One by one, I presented the documents. The projector showed a screenshot of Miranda's email to Hellickson's team, where she pledged full integration of clinical data before any official merger announcement. Then came the personnel layoff chart, matching perfectly with legal's internal list, alongside annotations singling out staff who had challenged policy changes. I wasn't finished. A recording played. Miranda's voice rang out clearly. If anyone's still stuck in legacy research, they need to go. I don't need sluggish scientists slowing down the future. Her laugh at the end left the room pale. Grant Peters, a board member representing Xerex Capital, adjusted his glasses. Frank, what exactly do you plan to do with all this? I opened a second envelope. A complete leadership restructuring, a new executive slate, preservation of original research teams, full restoration of internal audit protocols, and an indefinite freeze on any dealings with Hellickson until an independent investigation is conducted. The silence that followed stretched long. Carl tapped the table gently. Per company charter, if the controlling shareholder proposes an emergency leadership change, the board may vote immediately. I didn't let hesitation take root. I move for a vote of no confidence in Miranda Blake as CEO, based on breaches of professional ethics, manipulation of medical data, financial fraud, and abuse of personnel authority. Marcus distributed the ballots. Some hesitated, but most already understood. Few ever get the chance to rebuild from wreckage. Yet today, they sat before the man who once built the structure and was ready to save it again. My eyes stayed fixed on the glass window. Behind me, Miranda walked in, same dark brown hair pinned neatly, same flawless makeup, same confident stride as if the floor beneath her belonged to her. But when her eyes met Marcus holding the ballots, everything shifted. She knew the game was ending. She just didn't know who had placed the queen in check. Miranda didn't simply enter the room. She strode in as if she still owned it, despite the air being as heavy as stone around every chair. She greeted everyone with a polite smile, hand brushing the edge of the glass table like she was still in control. "Apologies for being late," she said calmly. "I just finished a call with Hellickson about the rollout of our strategic partnership." Then she opened her laptop, quickly launched a presentation, and didn't wait for anyone to respond. "As you can see," she continued, pointing at the graph, "if completed on schedule in Q2, the merger with Hellickson will push Metatronics stock up at least 23% within 6 months. If we delay—" "Miranda," I cut in, standing, my voice not loud but enough to draw every head. "We're not here for a sales pitch." She froze, looking up at me with eyes that tried to conceal surprise. "Frank," she said, "you're no longer an employee. Your presence at an executive session is entirely inappropriate." I pulled a folder from my case, placed it on the table, and slid it to Marcus. "This is the emergency authority confirmation, signed and sealed this morning. Per Clause 14B in the company bylaws, a shareholder holding over 75% of equity has the right to call a vote of no confidence on any executive upon discovery of actions that jeopardize corporate direction, ethics, or assets." Carl Emerson stepped forward and placed a second copy in front of her. "This is the legal department's official copy." Miranda scanned the room. No one smiled back at her. "What are you trying to do?" she muttered. "Get revenge because I fired you?" "No," I replied, my eyes fixed on her. "I'm protecting the legacy my father left behind from being sold off for a few pretty numbers on a quarterly report." I projected the screen. An image of her email to Hellickson appeared, followed by the altered internal report, then the list of employees removed from the system after speaking up. Each piece of evidence laid out clearly, each action shown on a timeline. Miranda scoffed. "None of this violates policy. I have full authority to act in the company's strategic interest." "The G27 drug trial failed," I said, not letting her finish. "Liver toxicity exceeded the safety threshold. You hit it, fired the project lead, and continued negotiating the licensing deal with Hellickson, not for strategy, but for a $4 million bonus in your post-merger consulting contract." She turned to Carl. "You can't let this continue. I have the right to respond. I have the right to defend my reputation." "You do," Carl nodded. "After the vote." Grant Peters spoke up, representative of one of the 3 major investment firms. "If what Frank presents is accurate, this is no longer an internal matter. This is abuse of power, and we can't continue investing under this leadership." Miranda gripped the table edge, her nails dug into the glass. "I took this company to the top of the profit charts," she said through clenched teeth. "And you disappeared for 3 years, then show up like some righteous knight?" "No," I answered, voice low. "I'm no knight, but I'm not the irrelevant fool you thought you fired either." The room fell utterly silent as Carl stepped forward and placed a ballot box on the table. "According to our bylaws, a vote of confidence regarding CEO Miranda Blake will commence immediately." Ballots were distributed. One by one, hands marked their choices. Marcus collected them. Carl and 2 attorneys counted. Miranda sat motionless, no resistance, no more excuses. Carl looked up. 8, no confident votes, 2 abstained. Vote is valid per company charter. The decision is effective immediately. She stared at me, eyes full of resentment. "You'll regret this. You don't know what I'm capable of." "I think you should be more concerned with what you've already done," I said. A security guard tapped lightly at the door, waiting. Miranda packed up her laptop without a word. As she walked out, no one in the boardroom moved. It wasn't until the door shut behind her that Grant finally asked, "So, Frank, what's your plan for Metatronics?" I looked at them, then at the org chart in front of me, and gently pushed the remaining folder toward the center of the table. We start over, but this time, with conscience. A sudden knock broke the taut air like a hammer on glass. Miranda whipped around, clearly not expecting anyone else. Two men in black suits entered, one carrying a briefcase, the other wearing a lawyer's badge. Miranda rushed toward them, gesturing like she had found a lifeline in open water. "These are my new legal representatives," she said quickly, turning to Carl. "Per proper protocol, any decision regarding executive leadership must be reviewed under dual legal oversight. This vote is invalid until legitimacy is reassessed." Carl didn't rush. He nodded slightly, then motioned for the two men to take a seat. The man on the left spoke first. "I'm James Toland, from Toland and Brock. We were retained by Miss Blake last month after she terminated the contract with Emerson and Associates." Marcus furrowed his brow, flipping quickly through his notes. No notice of legal representation change was submitted to the board. Miranda smiled, but it lacked its usual edge. 3 board members signed off. I have the originals right here. She pulled out a packet bearing signatures and slid it to Carl. I stood, pulled out my phone, and sent a quick message. Not 3 minutes later, the door opened again. An elderly man with snow-white hair and razor-sharp eyes entered. No introduction needed. "Good morning, everyone," he said clearly. "I'm Gerald Emerson, founder of Emerson and Associates. I'm here at the direct request of the controlling shareholder." Miranda froze. "You're no longer our legal counsel." Gerald didn't respond. He pulled a thick document from his briefcase, the title bold at the top. Current Legal Representation Agreement between Metatronics, Inc. and Emerson and Associates. He placed it in front of Carl. "This contract is still in force. No termination notice, no renegotiation record, no board-approved release." He turned to the 2 men beside Miranda. "Gentlemen, can you show me official authorization per corporate bylaws?" James said nothing. The other man shook his head slightly. Gerald nodded and pointed at the signatures on Miranda's document. "These were generated using handwriting simulation software. I ran verification from our office. This is a forgery." The boardroom was now choking with silence. Lainey Cobb, a board member who hadn't spoken all morning, finally did. "Miranda, did you unilaterally assign legal counsel without board approval?" Miranda clenched her purse strap. I acted under Clause 6A of Bylaw Appendix 3 when the CEO deems it necessary." "There is no Appendix 3 clause permitting outside counsel without majority board approval," Carl cut in. "Your document is invalid. These individuals do not legally represent Metatronics." James Toland stood, awkwardly nodded, and said, "We'll withdraw from the session." The door clicked shut behind them, leaving behind a silence of a very different kind. The silence of collapse. Miranda stood slowly. She didn't speak. She gathered her papers, then turned to me. "You orchestrated all of this," she said. "Every step, the departments, the board, all under your control." I said nothing. No need. Carl spoke, voice firm. "Given the confirmation of legal fraud and false representation, the board has grounds to permanently remove Ms. Miranda Blake as CEO and refer all violations to federal investigators." Murmurs spread around the room. Miranda stepped toward the door, not looking back. She was no longer in charge. Not even relevant. Gerald patted my shoulder. "Charles would be proud." I looked up, met each gaze around the room, then turned to the screen, still showing the header, Future of Metatronics. "Now we begin," I said quietly. "With law, with transparency, with the people who never left this company, even when pushed out." The next morning, Metatronics' main hall was no longer a place of awkward nods and hurried steps. Instead, hundreds of employees had arrived early, many standing shoulder to shoulder between folding chairs, their eyes full of mixed hope and doubt. On a temporary stage, the old podium that once belonged to my father was draped in black cloth. I stood behind the projector, reviewing the final slides. No growth charts, no flashy slogans, just real faces. Employees from every department, photographed in meetings, labs, production floors. All tied to the 3 words I had chosen as our headline: quality, integrity, people. As the spotlight swept across the stage, I stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my eyes scanning the crowd, careful not to linger too long on any familiar face. I'm Frank Donovan. Some of you knew me as Frank Ellis, working in internal compliance. Others may have seen me wiping down the coffee machine on the 11th floor of the research wing. A few quiet laughs rippled through the crowd, brief but genuine, not at the joke, but at the sudden release of tension. I want to make it absolutely clear, Metatronex will not be merging with any corporation. That plan has been fully terminated as of this morning. All associated records have been recalled and any preliminary agreements voided. If anyone here was facing termination under recent cost-cutting policies, your job is safe. No one is being let go. I let a few seconds pass. And for anyone who was told they were no longer a fit for the new pace, know this. You are the very reason I came back to the executive floor. On the screen behind me appeared an image of Haley, the technician who had been reassigned to the storage room. The photo showed her carefully calibrating an aging bioanalyzer, still wearing her rubber gloves, eyes locked on the screen. When I was a mid-level employee, I saw firsthand that collapse doesn't come from the outside. It begins when we forget who we are. Metatronex wasn't built through profit games. It started in an old warehouse in East Houston where my father mixed early drug samples by hand because he couldn't stand watching patients die simply because they couldn't afford treatment. I flipped to the next slide, a chart outlining the new internal restructure. No more staff cuts, no more efficiency audit departments. Instead, we're implementing an independent quality assessment program, a newly formed ethics review board, and a role that's never existed in our company before, frontline employee representation in quarterly board meetings. I know some of you still have doubts. For the past 3 years, we've watched honest people pushed out, essential protocols stripped away, and core values turned into marketing slogans. I looked down at the silent crowd. But today, I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to believe in what we'll do together. The air shifted. A few heads nodded. Someone wiped their eyes on the sleeve of a white lab coat. I stepped away from the podium, then turned back and picked up the microphone again. Yesterday, Miranda Blake called me dead weight, told the whole office I no longer belonged here. I looked toward the back row, where the warehouse workers, maintenance crew, and delivery drivers stood. Maybe she was right if being a fit means staying quiet and falling in line, but I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to make sure those without a voice still get heard, that no one ever has to choose between ethics and survival. I lifted my head and offered a quiet smile. And if anyone's still asking why I came back, the answer's simple. There's nothing sweeter than success earned on your own terms. The applause came slowly at first, then it swelled like a wave, reaching even the far corners of the hall. I saw Marcus near the aisle clapping steadily, a flicker of relief finally on his face. Diane smiled at me from across the seats. Haley covered her face with both hands. I stopped looking at the projector. I looked directly at the people in front of me, not a company I'd just won back, but a family I had never left. Now it was time to rebuild it, brick by brick. Not to return to the past, but to remind each other that some things are worth preserving, no matter the times. Frank Donovan's story is living proof that courage, conviction, and professional integrity still belong in a corporate world often driven by bottom lines. By stepping away from power to observe quietly from within, he not only exposed hidden wrongdoing, but also restored the real values of a company once built on trust. In an age where profit often reigns supreme, Frank reminds us that lasting success only comes when people and principles are placed at the center. What do you think about Frank's choices and everything he did to protect his family's legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more meaningful and moving stories about family and life.